From burning a newborn baby alive on official orders, to watching a man get disemboweled while calmly eating lunch, to protecting grain shipments out of a starving country with armed soldiers. These are the 10 most brutal queens in British history. And some of these women were so ruthless, so calculated, that the kings of their era genuinely looked soft by comparison. Like Mary I, who didn't just burn Protestants at the stake, she specifically ordered damp wood to make it last longer. But we're starting with someone even older, and honestly, even more terrifying. Number 10. Boudica, the Revenge Queen, around 60 AD, queen of the Iceni tribe in what is now East Anglia. And look, most people know the name. There's a statue of her right next to the Houses of Parliament. She's practically a national mascot at this point. But here's the thing. The statue makes her look heroic, and the reality was something closer to a planned killing campaign. When Roman officials flogged her publicly, assaulted her daughters, and seized her land after her husband died, she didn't write a strongly worded letter. She raised an army, pulled together multiple Celtic tribes, and went to war. Not battlefield war, exactly. More like a planned massacre of ordinary people across 3 cities. Camulodunum, modern Colchester, was razed to the ground. The refugees who locked themselves inside the temple of Claudius were burned alive inside it. Then Londinium, then Verulamium. That is not rebellion. That is revenge with a body count. Writers from that time described the mutilation of women and children with shocking ritual cruelty that was specifically designed to erase any trace that Rome had ever been there. The death toll was somewhere between 70,000 and 80,000 people. Rome hit a queen, and she answered by erasing cities. The Roman Ninth Legion marched out to stop her, and she destroyed its infantry so completely that the cavalry barely escaped. Rome spent a decade rebuilding. She was eventually lured into a narrow valley by the Roman general Suetonius Paulinus, where her massive force got cut to pieces. Rather than be paraded through Rome in chains, she poisoned herself. That's Boudica. Brutal, yes, but also genuinely wronged first. So yeah, national mascot, with massacre statistics. The women coming up on this list, a few of them had no excuse at all. Number 9. Cynethryth of Mercia, the diplomatic trap queen, and she is genuinely underrated as a historical villain. She was the consort to King Offa of Mercia, who was basically the most powerful ruler in Anglo-Saxon England at the time. And Cynethryth was so politically powerful that she was the only queen of her era to have coins struck in her own name, a privilege that was reserved for kings. She was a genuine co-ruler, which makes what she allegedly did even more calculated. When the young King Ethelbert II of East Anglia arrived at the Mercian court under an official promise of safe passage, the most sacred political protection that existed, Cynethryth reportedly decided he was a threat. So she had a chair rigged over a concealed pit, and when he fell in, he was strangled and smothered. That is not court politics. That's murder with table manners. Offa immediately annexed East Anglia, which tells you everything you need to know about whether this was planned. Safe conduct meant safe until Cynethryth changed the definition. The victim, Ethelbert, was later made a saint. There's a shrine to him at Hereford Cathedral. Cynethryth, meanwhile, spent her final years as an abbess, wrapped in respectable religious life. Medieval diplomacy had a trapdoor, literally. History remembers her as the woman who invented the diplomatic honey trap. Number 8. Eadburh of Wessex, the Poison Queen. If Cynethryth was calculating, Eadburh of Wessex was just out of control. She was the daughter of Offa, yes, same Offa, and she married King Beorhtric of Wessex as part of a political marriage deal, and she immediately started running the court like she was the one wearing the crown. The chronicler Asser, who wrote a biography of King Alfred, explicitly documents her as someone who poisoned political enemies. Her method was simple. If she wanted someone gone, she'd first try to get Beorhtric to exile or execute them. If he refused, she poisoned them. That is not influence. That is a chemistry-based foreign policy. This worked for a while, until 802 when she prepared a lethal drink for a royal favorite and her husband accidentally drank from the same cup. She killed her own king. One cup, one dead king, one very awkward royal marriage. She fled to Francia within days, taking a significant chunk of the royal treasury with her. Charlemagne reportedly offered her the choice of marrying him or his son. She chose wrong, and he denied her both. She was eventually expelled from a convent after a scandal, and she spent her final years wandering the streets of Pavia as a beggar. But here's the legacy that actually matters. Her crimes were so horrifying that the West Saxon nobility passed a formal resolution banning any future king's wife from holding the title of queen. Imagine being so toxic that your kingdom bans the job title after you. She literally ended the title of queen in Wessex. One woman's poisoning habit wiped out an entire royal title. Now, the next one is where things get genuinely theatrical in the worst possible way. Number 7. Isabella of France, the she-wolf. Isabella of France, queen consort to Edward II. And Edward II was not a great king. He was weak, he was dominated by his favorites, and the worst of those favorites was a man named Hugh Despencer the Younger, who systematically stripped Isabella of her lands, her income, and her dignity for years. So Isabella fled to France, allied with the exiled rebel Roger Mortimer, raised a mercenary army, and invaded England. The country hated Despencer so much that it was almost a bloodless coup. But what Isabella did with her victory is what puts her on this list. Despencer's execution was engineered for maximum suffering. He was dragged through the streets, forced to climb a 50-foot gallows that had been specially constructed for the occasion, hanged until he was half dead, cut down while still alive, castrated, his severed genitals burned in front of his eyes, disemboweled, his heart torn from his chest, then beheaded and quartered. 6 distinct phases of execution. At that point, execution had basically become theater, and Isabella reportedly watched the entire thing from a viewing gallery, dining calmly with her ladies-in-waiting throughout. Dinner and disembowelment is a very specific level of calm. Edward II was deposed, imprisoned at Berkeley Castle, and almost certainly murdered on their orders shortly after. She outlived almost everyone she destroyed. She didn't just win, she scheduled the suffering. That's the she-wolf of France. But if you think using a 7-year-old to sentence men to death sounds like something nobody would actually do, meet Margaret of Anjou. Number 6. The Civil War Queen. Queen consort to Henry VI, a king who was unable to rule properly during the Wars of the Roses. With a husband who could barely function, Margaret became the actual commander of the Lancastrian faction, directing armies, forming alliances, ordering executions. After her victory at the Second Battle of St. Albans, she captured Yorkist prisoners that Henry VI had personally promised amnesty. She ignored her husband's order, brought the captives in front of her 7-year-old son Edward, and asked him what death they should die. The boy said behead them. She complied immediately. That is not parenting. That is training a child on executions. Henry was apparently frantic. She didn't care. Even Henry VI knew it had gone too far, and this was the Wars of the Roses. The bar was already underground. After the Battle of Wakefield, she ordered the Duke of York's severed head mounted on the city gate of York, crowned with a paper crown to mock his royal ambitions. She didn't just fight a civil war, she raised one. Her cause eventually collapsed at Tewkesbury in 1471. Her son was killed in the battle. Henry VI was murdered in the Tower of London within weeks. She was ransomed back to France and spent her remaining years in poverty. She died having outlived everyone she had fought for. Now, if you're enjoying this and you want to see more of this, subscribe, because we do this kind of deep dive history every week and you don't want to miss what's coming. Number 5. Mary I, Bloody Mary. And yes, she earned it. England's first crowned queen regnant, daughter of Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon, raised Catholic while England shifted Protestant around her. She took the throne in 1553 and immediately set about reversing the Reformation by making Protestant practice a crime punishable by death. Over 5 years, her administration burned approximately 280 to 300 Protestants at the stake in public spaces. But the detail that makes this something beyond ordinary religious persecution is this. She ordered damp wood to be used specifically to slow the fires and prolong the suffering. That was a deliberate choice. When even the wood is part of the torture plan, you have crossed into a different category. And then there was Guernsey, 1556. 3 women were condemned for heresy and tied to the stake. One of them was heavily pregnant. The heat caused her to give birth mid-execution. A bystander pulled the live infant from the flames. The presiding bailiff ordered the newborn thrown back into the fire, declaring it had inherited its mother's heresy. That happened. It was documented. It spread across Protestant Europe. That is not policy. That is horror with paperwork. The burnings didn't suppress Protestantism. They made it a martyr's cause. Mary died in 1558, having failed to restore Catholicism and having handed the throne directly to her Protestant half-sister Elizabeth. 5 years on the throne, and somehow she left behind a nickname people still say in the mirror for fun. Yikes. Number 4. Mary Queen of Scots, the husband murder scandal. Queen of Scots is the one who allegedly blew up her own husband. She was Queen of Scotland from infancy, Raised at the French court, married the French king, and returned to Scotland after he died. Her second marriage was to Lord Darnley, handsome, politically useful, and almost immediately a disaster. Darnley became paranoid and violent. He organized the murder of Mary's secretary David Rizzio in front of her while she was pregnant. So the marriage was already less romantic and more of a locked-room crime scene. Their relationship collapsed completely. Then, in February 1567, the house where Darnley was recovering from illness was destroyed by a massive explosion in the middle of the night. His body was found in the garden, strangled, not killed by the blast, which suggests he'd tried to escape and was caught. That is not a suspicious death. That is a suspicious death wearing a crown and waving at you. Mary married the chief suspect, the Earl of Bothwell, 3 months later. That's either the most incriminating thing a person has ever done or the most catastrophic political misjudgment in Scottish history. Possibly both. She was eventually forced to abdicate, fled to England, and spent 19 years as Elizabeth I's prisoner before being executed in 1587. It reportedly took 3 strikes of the axe to remove her head. Mary Queen of Scots didn't just have enemies, she had plot twists. Number 3, Elizabeth I, the Golden Age with a dark side. Elizabeth I is the Golden Age queen, the one with the portraits and the speeches and the defeat of the Spanish Armada. But what happened in Ireland during her reign is something the Golden Age mythology tends to skip over. Her campaign to suppress the Munster Rebellion in the 1580s involved a destroy-everything policy so thorough that it created a famine across the province. The poet Edmund Spenser, yes, the one who wrote the Fairy Queen dedicated to Elizabeth, personally witnessed it and wrote that the surviving Irish came crawling out of the woods looking like skeletons, so destroyed they could barely speak. That's the part they usually leave out of the portraits. Her Lord Deputy used punishing whole communities, executed civilians, and left entire regions depopulated. The population of Munster collapsed. The Golden Age had a geography. Ireland was not in it. Elizabeth was not just watching. She approved the strategy and replaced commanders who weren't brutal enough. Imagine being told your commander is too soft because the famine isn't working fast enough. The Golden Age had music, poetry, theater, and scorched earth. And then there's Victoria. Number 2, the Famine Queen. While approximately 1 million people starved to death in Ireland between 1845 and 1852, and another million emigrated in desperate conditions, the British government under Victoria continued to export food from Ireland under armed guard. Grain, livestock, butter, shipped out while people died in the fields beside the roads they were too weak to walk. That is not famine relief. That is famine management for the people with food. Victoria personally donated £2,000 to famine relief, less than she spent on a single banquet. History really does write its own villains sometimes. The infrastructure, the policy, the armed escorts protecting the exports, all of it happened under her reign, with her government's full authority. Ireland's population fell by roughly 25% in 7 years, a quarter of a country gone, while food kept moving under guard. The resentment it generated shaped Irish nationalism for the next century and a half, and arguably made Irish independence inevitable. Number 1, Elizabeth II, the Queen of Hidden Files. Elizabeth II closes the list, and this one is different in character, but not in consequence. The British Empire committed documented brutal crimes during her reign. The Mau Mau detention camps in Kenya in the 1950s, where prisoners were tortured and executed. The forced removal of the Chagassians from Diego Garcia. The conduct in Northern Ireland. What makes Elizabeth II's entry here is what happened to the records. As colonies became independent, British officials secretly destroyed or hid important records in a program called Operation Legacy. Files were burned, shredded, or shipped to a secret archive at Hanslope Park. That is not just a cover-up. That is an empire cleaning blood off the paperwork. The FCO later admitted that 1.2 million files were being held there, hidden from public view. 1.2 million files. That's not a filing cabinet. That's a buried empire. Elizabeth II was not a governing monarch in the way her predecessors were, but she reigned over a system that burned its own paperwork rather than face accountability. And that is its own kind of brutality. Some monarchs leave skulls, some leave silence. So here's what this list actually shows you. Boudica was brutal, but provoked. Cynethryth was calculating. Eadburh was reckless and paid for it. Isabella was theatrical and vengeful. Margaret was desperate. Mary I was ideologically committed to cruelty. Mary Queen of Scots was either guilty or catastrophically unlucky. Elizabeth I built a golden age on top of a scorched one. Victoria presided over a famine with armed escorts on the grain carts. and Elizabeth II reigned while the evidence was quietly set on fire. The thing that connects all of them is that power, when it goes wrong in very specific ways, and the history books usually only tell you the half of it. Drop a comment with which queen shocked you the most. Genuinely curious whether it's Mary I or Victoria that gets people, because the answer is usually split. Subscribe if you're not already, and we'll see you in the next one.